First, he quietly knocks the cop out, then straps him tightly onto a dolly. Then Hannibal slowly pushes the heavy cart toward the balcony. Next, with cold precision, he slices open the man's abdomen, then suddenly shoves him off, letting his intestines spill out. This is Hannibal's first kill in 10 years. And Starling, who was once just a trainee, has now become a senior FBI agent. At this moment, Starling is in charge of a major drug case. She already has intel on the drug lord, his location and the evidence against him. To ensure everything goes perfectly, Starling is appointed as the lead, working with Officer Bolton from the Washington PD on a joint operation. Her thinking is sharp, her orders are clear, and her plan is flawless. But Bolton is arrogant. He doesn't take this female commander seriously, and has no intention of following her orders. Starling doesn't care at all. She calls him out right in front of everyone. If it weren't for the mayor's orders, she would never let an outsider join the operation. If Bolton doesn't want to follow her lead, he can take it up with the mayor himself. Starling dominates the room, leaving Bolton completely speechless. Under Starling's command, the team quickly sets up positions, ready to move in at any moment. But unexpectedly, the dealer appears at the corner holding a baby. Starling reacts instantly, calling off the operation and ordering everyone to hold position. But Bolton, trying to save face, ignores her command and opens fire in front of everyone. He takes down a few dealers, but the entire plan falls apart. In the end, Starling is forced to confront the drug lord herself. She tries to talk him down, but he suddenly pulls out a gun. In the chaos, Starling fires a shot at him. The bullet doesn't hit the baby, but the child is covered in blood, and worse, the drug lord has AIDS. Fearing infection, Starling risks her life to wash the blood off the baby immediately. The incident quickly hits the headlines, and all the blame points at Starling. Some media outlets, chasing clicks, widely broadcast footage of her pointing a gun at the baby. Overnight, Starling is labeled as a violent officer. Meanwhile, Bolton, who disobeyed orders and got 5 agents killed, is portrayed as a fallen hero. To calm public outrage, Starling is pushed forward to take the blame. Soon, the Justice Department sends Special Agent Paul to investigate whether Starling was at fault. But the department doesn't care about the truth. They just need someone to take the fall. Just as Starling is about to be punished, the meeting is suddenly interrupted by a phone call. A mysterious figure pulls strings at the highest level to protect her. The reason he specifically asked for Starling is because his case is tied to the cannibal, Hannibal. In this area, Starling is the most qualified person in the entire department. Soon, Starling arrives at a private estate and meets the mysterious man. She recognizes him instantly. He's the 4th victim of Hannibal and the only one who survived. Now he's paralyzed and horribly disfigured. His name is Mason. He holds no official power, but his family is extremely wealthy. Worse, Mason is a severe pedophile. He raped his own sister and murdered dozens of children in just 2 years. But he faked mental illness and escaped legal punishment. The court couldn't convict him, so they assigned Hannibal, a psychiatrist, to treat him, but Mason's evil and hypocrisy completely enraged Hannibal. One night, Hannibal drugs Mason and manipulates him into cutting off his own face. Hannibal didn't kill him, not out of mercy. He believed that for someone as narcissistic as Mason, living without satisfaction is far worse than death. From that moment on, revenge against Hannibal becomes Mason's only reason to live. So Mason prepares a special gift for Hannibal, a pack of bloodthirsty wild boars that will attack anything alive until it's completely devoured. Then Mason presents Hannibal's X-ray, but refuses to reveal who sent it. Just from that X-ray, Starling knows Hannibal is still alive. With the information, Starling returns to the bureau and starts investigating. She repeatedly watches the footage of Hannibal biting off a nurse's nose, and finally notices something. Since Hannibal escaped 10 years ago, everyone involved died except Barney the orderly. Starling finds Barney, who reveals that Hannibal only eats the root. Barney survived because he was always polite, but that's not why Starling is here. She bluntly points out that everything Hannibal touched, his drawings, books, even toilet seats, were sold online by Barney under fake names. Even Hannibal's bite mask was sold to Mason for a high price. Exposed, Barney gives up the rest, including secret recordings made by the warden. Barney also reveals that Hannibal often talked about Starling late at night after her first visit. Hannibal compared her to a pigeon, one of 2 types, shallow or deep. When 2 deep ones pair up, their offspring tend to dive straight to their death. He called Starling a deep one. He hoped one of her parents was shallow so she wouldn't crash and burn. But Starling is that diving pigeon too honest to compromise, which is why she's made a scapegoat and suspended. Hearing his voice again, Starling falls deep in thought. Meanwhile, scholars in an old Florence library argue over a new curator. A scholar named Dr. Fell stands out with his deep knowledge of medieval culture. He is actually Hannibal in disguise. Inspector Pazzi is investigating the previous curator's disappearance, and Hannibal is a prime suspect. But with just a few words, Hannibal exposes Patsy's past emotion and mocks his incompetence. Every word Hannibal spoke pierced Patsy's heart like a needle, and it left him holding a grudge deep inside. At that moment, Starling suddenly received a letter from Hannibal. She waited until her colleagues left before carefully opening the letter. Even though they hadn't seen each other for 10 years, Hannibal had been closely monitoring Starling's situation. Learning that Starling had been suspended for a failed mission worried Hannibal greatly. He analyzed her predicament in a tone that was caring yet tinged with mockery. He also mentioned that his name had appeared again on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, and he guessed that Starling might be handling the case. He said that if Starling insisted on investigating, he wouldn't mind returning to the public eye to help her reclaim her career peak. Starling realized that this letter was both a provocation to the police and a signal directed at her. She immediately had experts examine the letter, but the only partial fingerprint couldn't confirm it was Hannibal's. The only clue was the lingering scent on the paper she could smell. Tests showed it was from a hand cream containing ambergris, sold in only a few stores worldwide, one of which was in Florence. Starling contacted the local police for the perfume store's surveillance, without explaining why to prevent leaks, but this backfired. Patsy happened to be at the station and immediately recognized Hannibal on the footage, while his colleagues only knew it was a superior's task and not the full story. Sensing something was off, Patsy didn't send the footage to Starling immediately, but took it home himself. At home, Patsy logged onto the FBI website and found Hannibal's photo on the top 10 list. He also discovered a $3 million bounty for capturing Hannibal, and excitedly wrote down the contact number. The next day, Patsy went to a phone booth, shaking as he dialed the number, and it turned out Mason was the one offering the reward. Due to years of false intel, Mason demanded Patsy first obtain Hannibal's fingerprints, promising a $100,000 deposit upon verification. Patsy went to the library and rang the bell, intending to use the missing person case as a pretext to get fingerprints. But he underestimated Hannibal's alertness and the plan failed. Frustrated, Patsy found a thief he had previously caught, gave him a silver bracelet, and sent him to steal from Hannibal. Given Hannibal's vigilance, he would surely grab the thief's wrist first, leaving fingerprints on the bracelet. The thief did manage to get the fingerprints, but paid with his life. Patsy realized Hannibal's cruelty anew. He washed the blood off his hands in tears, knowing he had directly caused the thief's death. But thinking of his family's financial troubles, his guilt quickly vanished. The next day, Patsy brought the bracelet with fingerprints to the meeting point. After data comparison, the fingerprints were confirmed as Hannibal's, and Patsy happily received the $100,000 deposit. But he wasn't satisfied. He wanted the full $3 million bounty. Later, Patsy took his wife to the opera and unexpectedly saw Hannibal in the audience. His calculating gaze instinctively flinched the moment Hannibal looked at him. Hannibal's gaze lingered briefly, then calmly turned away, as if seeing through everything. Even though Patsy delayed sending the footage, Starling still noticed something was off. Additionally, Starling found Patsy frequently visiting the FBI bounty website and immediately deduced Hannibal was in Florence. She quickly called to warn Patsy, telling him Hannibal was extremely dangerous. But Patsy, blinded by money, insisted on completing the hunt before the FBI intervened, timing it for Hannibal's first night as director. Mason's henchmen were waiting outside to assist, while Patsy's job was to lure Hannibal out. But things didn't go according to his plan. In Hannibal's eyes, Patsy was merely food waiting to be served. The moment Patsy entered the library, Hannibal had already decided how he would kill him. As Hannibal was about to push Patsy off the balcony, Patsy's phone vibrated, and Starling's voice came through. Hannibal wasn't surprised, because the scent on the envelope was a clue he had intentionally left. But this wasn't the time for reminiscing. He had more important matters to attend to. In the end, Patsy was gutted, reenacting the fate of his ancestor from 500 years ago, dying in the same spot in a more brutal way. The henchmen downstairs rushed into the library, but were effortlessly dealt with by the prepared Hannibal. Before leaving, he elegantly waved at a street camera across the road. Everyone thought it was a provocation to the police, but only Mason realized Hannibal was signaling Starling. This made Mason keenly aware that Hannibal had a unique feeling towards Starling, so he devised a plan to corner Starling, forcing Hannibal to reveal himself. Mason immediately contacted Paul from the Justice Department, instructing him to suspend Starling at home on trumped-up charges. It turned out Mason's plan worked, and Hannibal quietly returned to the US. Meanwhile, Paul was still gloating over the $500,000 he received, unaware that his end was near. The first thing Hannibal did upon returning was to sneak into Starling's house late at night to see her. Then he went to the hospital, posed as a doctor to enter the autopsy room, and stole a set of tools. Hannibal knew Mason was after him and understood that Starling was suffering at the FBI because of him. So he arranged for Starling to come to the mall, leading her to find a gift he left. It was a pair of expensive high heels, as if Hannibal was making amends for mocking her cheap shoes 10 years ago. Just as Hannibal was about to leave, Mason's henchman appeared from behind and attacked him with a taser. The strong shock temporarily incapacitated Hannibal, and he was lifted into a car. Starling chased after him, wanting to intervene, but shooting could easily harm bystanders. Starling had no choice but to report the license plate and situation to her superiors, firmly stating that Mason's men had kidnapped Hannibal. Even though Starling was still suspended, her superiors chose to believe her due to her solid track record over the years. They immediately ordered a full search of Mason's estate, but found nothing. Hannibal was nowhere to be found. It turned out Mason had anticipated the police search and had his men stay outside for a while, only returning to the estate after the police left. But Starling was convinced Hannibal had been kidnapped, so she planned to sneak into the estate to investigate further. At this moment, Mason finally came face to face with Hannibal, but he wasn't in a hurry to act. Instead, he introduced the wild boars he had raised, proudly claiming they were a gift for Hannibal. Even more obsessively, he insisted that the revenge take place at 8 p.m., just like dinner time. Hannibal was then taken to a cabin near the estate. The vehicle carrying Hannibal happened to be spotted by the stakeout Starling, so she quietly followed. Inside the cabin, Hannibal was tightly bound to a wooden frame, and Mason had his men inject him with adrenaline. The goal was to keep him conscious, so he could watch the boars tear him apart slowly. Starling arrived at that moment. As the screams rang out, the boars became frenzied, violently ramming the wooden bars. Seeing this, Starling immediately pushed open the cabin door and decisively shot down 2 handlers. To prevent them from getting up and fighting back, Starling handcuffed the 2 together. While untying Hannibal, she didn't notice a handler hiding in the loft. Although she shot him in time, she was hit in the shoulder and fell to the ground. Meanwhile, the boars broke through the fence and charged inside. But they seemed afraid of Hannibal, instead turning to attack the 2 handlers. At that moment, Mason arrived. Seeing his revenge plan about to fail, he shouted at the doctor to go grab a gun and kill them. But the doctor was already terrified, let alone go grab a gun to kill. Hannibal saw through his thoughts and began to manipulate the doctor into pushing Mason down, making it look like the doctor's idea. After only a few seconds of hesitation, the doctor decisively acted, witnessing the boars devour Mason. Thus, Hannibal carried the injured Starling out of the estate and went to Paul's residence. After bandaging Starling's wounds, Hannibal quietly waited for Paul. When Starling woke, she found the gunshot wounds stitched and her clothes changed into an evening gown. The stitching required a heavy dose of morphine, leaving Starling feeling weak and sore. Still, she forced herself to call the police from the villa. They could arrive in 10 minutes. Hannibal downstairs heard the noise but glanced at the time and continued preparing dinner. When Starling went downstairs, she found Paul sitting dazed in a wheelchair, clearly drugged. Under the influence of drugs, Paul ramblingly revealed his intentions towards Starling. It turned out he had always wanted to possess Starling, wanting her as a campaign assistant and for other sordid reasons. In Hannibal's eyes, Paul was as disrespectful as the prisoner who had offended Starling years ago, so he meticulously prepared a dinner. To classical music, Hannibal sliced a piece from Paul's exposed frontal lobe with a dining knife. Cooked with butter and spices, he fed it to Paul himself. The entire process was as elegant as a sacred ritual, yet utterly absurd and horrifying. As sirens approached, Hannibal made a final invitation to Starling, hoping she would see the rot in the FBI and leave with him for true freedom. But Starling answered with action, handcuffing them together. Hannibal's eyes were complex. Time was running out.
Where's the key? Okay. Above or below the wrist? This is really gonna hurt.
When the police arrived, they only saw Starling safe by the lake. Hannibal had vanished. Hannibal still couldn't bring himself to harm this little lamb Starling. He severed his own cuffed hand and, injured, boarded a plane to his next secluded hideaway. And that is where the story ends. Hannibal's feelings for Starling were far from simple love. They mixed intellectual admiration, spiritual resonance, and a mentor's guiding instinct. Starling could be seen as his creation, or as his mirror in the world of light. Hannibal admired Starling's integrity and resilience, qualities he had long abandoned. He longed to pull Starling into darkness, yet couldn't help protecting her light. This contradiction was the core of their relationship's allure. Hannibal could have easily freed himself from the handcuffs, but he chose to cut off his own wrist. This wasn't a clumsy escape, but his final act of tenderness towards Starling. He preserved her resolve without forcing her to follow him, fulfilling both their dignity in the most extreme way possible.